The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there, except for when they don't, because every Tuesday on this show and on our Times Radio History YouTube channel, the historian Ian Wilson joins me for our regular feature, If Only We'd Known, explaining why actually the present rather closely resembles the past. And this week, as senior policing figures have been put under scrutiny for the handling of public order and crime, we're going to look at the history of policing in Britain. Ian Wilson, hello.
Hello there.
Thank you as ever for being with us.
No, it's great joy.
The Met Police was created by the Home Secretary, later Prime Minister Robert Peel, in 1829. Why?
Well, it was post-war times. I mean, it was 1829. They were still suffering from the effects of the Napoleonic Wars, where economic hardship was terrible in Britain. There was great hunger, poverty, and that meant people drifting into the cities, especially London, which became the population rocketed. Mm-hmm. And there was a crime epidemic going on, rather of the kind that some people believe is going on in London.
What sort of burglary, murder, robbery?
Burglary, muggings, yeah. And obviously this happening at a time, don't forget, when you could be hanged for more or less anything, hanged for picking a pocket. Mm. So people were pretty desperate. And Robert Peel, who was Home Secretary and went on to be a great Prime Minister, had two ideas really. One was that the crime rate must be brought down. And the second was that in that very, very difficult political climate where the mob could easily turn nasty, they needed to be able to police the populace. Because the Chartist movement, which you and I would think of as a great movement, wanting to have emancipation and the votes for everybody if possible, was, in the eyes of authority, it was a dangerous thing because it could lead to mob.
And firstly, I guess, who were the police? Where were they drafted from? Were they from the local communities or what?
We now have the idea, don't we, that we need more and more people in the police force who identify with the local community. Peel had the exactly opposite idea. Because there were so many people coming in from outside London, and this reform was for the London police primarily, because there were so many people coming from outside London, and particularly impoverished agricultural workers, he hired 3,000, quite a lot, to start the force off, the Met off, 3,000 agricultural labourers. And his idea was that they shouldn't have any local contact with the population of London. So it was much more difficult to be corrupt.
Sounds a bit like ICE in a way.
It was a bit like ICE.
How were they regarded? How were they treated? Did people mind?
They were treated with very great suspicion, obviously, because they meant business. And if you were had up for theft, you were in danger of losing your life. It had a terrific effect on the crime rate. I mean, it was a zero tolerance policy. It was very like Rubio in New York.
Were they corrupt?
No. And it was only in the next generation that you get this thing of the police force in London coming from, the Dixon of Dock Green type of people, many of whom, of course, have been excellent people through the ages. Don't want to attack the police all the time. But there are dangers in that. And very, very quickly, the police force became a kind of homely mafia. A great many of them, again, nothing wrong with being a Freemason, but a great many of them Freemasons, quite literally, and even those who weren't literally Freemasons, in a kind of Masonic brotherhood. And that has its dangers, and you only have to look back to something like the Stephen Lawrence case, where there was clear case, not just of outright corruption and police being friends with the criminal families, such as the Norris family, who did for poor Stephen Lawrence, but in general, the idea that you look after your own.
Two brief equipment questions. Where did they get their silly hat from?
They were based on army helmets, funnily enough. I mean, they do look extremely silly, but they were dark blue and always have been, nearly black. And that was, if you look at old pictures of regimental uniforms, quite a number of the infantry regiments had helmets like that.
Okay, and were they never armed?
They were never actually armed with firearms, except in riot conditions, and then nearly always with riot, even after the invention of the Metropolitan Police. In order to quell a riot in this country, you have to call out the military and read the Riot Act before you do it.
For sure. Okay, so look, finally then, Ian Wilson, what lessons do you think today's police chiefs, beleaguered or otherwise, should take from Peel's early force?
Well, they are beleaguered, and I mean, Mark Rowley, the head of the Metropolitan Police, gave some really appalling interviews, one on Times Radio yesterday that I was listening to, in which he was trying to deny that crime is out of control. But we know that rapes are out of control. Shoplifting's never reported, but in many cases certainly not solved. People are having their phones stolen. And the mere fact that the murder rate has gone down doesn't mean that knife crime has gone down. So I think what Mark Rowley and the police ought to be thinking about is, what did Peel actually do for London? And he produced a lot of independent-minded police who were only accountable to the Home Secretary. They weren't accountable to themselves. And I think that's something that he ought to think about.
So you're basically saying that the capital should be flooded with farm labourers who answer only to Shabana Mahmood.
You don't have to have farm labourers, but you'd have non-Londoners, you would have recent immigrants and people of that sort who wouldn't have any kind of axe to grind. I really do think that's worth trying, worth thinking about.
Well, that would make for an exciting year, if only journalistically. Ian Wilson, thank you so much. Great pleasure having you here, as
Thanks,
absolutely
Hugo.
always. If you enjoyed that feature and you want more history content, do, of course, head online to our history channel. Just search for Times Radio History on YouTube.